In this season, we start really seeing a dark turn for Judas.
And why are you suggesting that you know better than I do what should be the next best course of action?
Look, I trust you. Do you trust me?
There seems to be a shift in his character and how you guys have been setting him up to kind of take this anti-hero villain direction in his character arc.
He sees his good friends, he sees his followers who don't get it, he sees some religious leaders, and it all just crushes him.
One of the things that does happen in episode 7 is the disciples go into complete disintegration and start throwing things and yelling at each other and threatening each other and talking about
Ruslan.
Chosen Khan, how you guys doing? You guys feeling good? Everyone fed, refreshed, relaxed? All right, guys. Let's jump into it. I need to know, the people need to know, when you guys get together to do your writing, what is the secret sauce? What is a day like when you guys are together? What's the ambiance? Is there specific music or incense being lit? What's going on, and how does this magic happen that we all get to experience?
we have incense, but it's cooking.
Well, let me say real quick before we start. So some of y'all might not know who Ruslan is. Look him up on YouTube, Ruslan. There's a reason he's here, and the reason he was here last year. He is a brilliant communicator and someone who really does help multiple generations understand the Word of God better, to understand God's character better, and he is someone that we really want to work with as much as possible, so we're really grateful to have him here, so thank you.
Oh, shucks. Thanks, Dallas.
So what's funny about your question is that all three of us have vastly different writing needs. So I am the type who gets started around 1 in the morning. Tyler is the type who's probably waking up shortly thereafter because he is a morning person. And I don't actually know what cave you operate in, if you know morning or night. But we're all very different, which is why when we get together once a year for our writing retreats where we get together to plot out each season. That's what we do once a year, and then multiple times a year, of course, we get together again, but where we spend about 2 to 3 days really mapping out the season and searching the scriptures and figuring out the stories we're going to tell based on the overall outline that we came up with years ago, back when we were in my basement when we first conceived of this thing. And so that's where I actually have to do a little bit of accommodation because Tyler gets up early and is raring to go and has got some of the greatest ideas in the world, and I want to be there for him. So we've compromised. We get up around 8:30 or 9. So for me, that's a big sacrifice. So
Get in
pray
the cold
for me.
plunge first.
Yes. And what's that?
We get in the cold plunge first.
Yeah, so I'm a cold tanker, so I'm always getting in cold plunges. But typically at our retreats, we're out in Oregon. This year we're actually in Utah. But we're usually at a place that's very cold, and there's usually a cold stream. So I force them to get in there with me in the ice cold water. And then that's how the day starts. And then we also, there's a very generous couple that hosts us at one of their retreats. And they provide a chef who then takes care of the food, which is really beautiful because then it allows us to just stay totally focused and on what we're doing. So Ryan, I don't even really know your routine very well. So what is your routine?
I'm available to write from 4 p.m. to 4 a.m.
Okay.
So you guys overlap by about 3 hours. And I wake up at like 5:30 and see all the texts they've been sending on the thread between 1 a.m. and 4 a.m.
Yeah.
So I start exactly when Tyler stops. I'm available for Dallas, and I'm usually awake when Tyler starts going. And you know, those are my general writing hours. And I also said the secret sauce was Josh Riffle, this chef at our retreats, who's an incredible and spiritual guy too.
What's cool about that schedule is that during peak writing season, there's literally one of the 3 chosen writers writing at every single hour of the day, like handing off the baton. It's just like a assembly line.
And you guys all see each other for like an hour a day because everyone's sleep schedule is all backwards.
Yeah.
Okay. I want to know, you said, Dallas, that things have been mapped out since you were in the basement. But how much of what we saw in season 4 is mapped out in advance when you guys were doing season 1? Is this And how calculated is this process? Like, how much of it is adjusting as you go versus, hey, season 1, we kind of know obviously we know how the story ends, right? But in season 4, how much of that is mapped out way in advance?
Yeah, so I would say that before season 1, when we were mapping things out, we did have the majority of the big moments. We knew which seasons they were going to come. We didn't know which episodes, of course, but we knew that season 4 was going to be the Lazarus season. We knew that season 4 was going to be the Thomas and Rama season. We knew that it was also going to be, because of the raising of Lazarus, we knew that that was going to be when we really spent the most amount of time with Mary and Martha, and so we figured that was those were key storylines that we were going to include. But the connective tissue to get there, we didn't know yet, of course. Some of that comes from, we hadn't even cast the show yet, so we didn't know yet who was going to play Peter and Matthew and all that. And of course, once you cast them, you realize the writing of their characters shifts over time. We didn't know exactly, for example, when Simon who became Peter, and Matthew would have their redemption story. So those are the kinds of things that end up slotting into place as the seasons go on. But I would say the big Bible moments, I can't think of an example where we shifted, other than, because we weren't planning on doing the walking on water. So when we decided to do that, when we were sitting down to talk about season 3, that, of course, shifted a lot of things around. And then that, of course, informs, okay, well, how are we going to get Simon to that moment of desperation? So then we worked our way backwards there. But other than that, most of our Bible moments, we knew in advance where they were going, and we work our way backwards so that we can more effectively set them up.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's almost coming together like a puzzle. Now, season 4 has been described as a season of dread, but there's some incredible payoffs, right? You mentioned the resurrection of Lazarus, the reconciliation between Peter and Matthew. How do you guys build up to those moments when you're leading people from, oh my gosh, this is heavy, to, wow, beautiful payoff? How does that get built up in your writing process?
Take that one. Well, writing is a lot of planning, a lot of inspiration, and a lot of rhythms. Rhythms are in every story, every joke you've ever told. When you're telling about something that happened at work, lest somebody's eyes glaze over as you're sharing, you have picked up on some rhythm. It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And in our stories, the middle is usually the most challenging part. It's a part where you've come to the top of the mountain only to realize there's 26 more peaks. You've figured out how to solve a problem. You did it your way, and you found out you're totally wrong. These are the midpoints in stories. And so as you talk about planning and what moments, what emotional content to fill in between the biblical moments, we're looking to seize on rhythms. And this season was the middle of the series. So it was hard by design. It is how stories work, and we can't hit the light unless we've hit some dark. So we're planning that on the macro level. And then in each iteration, right? We're doing 7 seasons, 8 episodes each, and we're looking at those rhythms. And now you've gotten to know them. You may not be able to pick out, hey, we're at minute 24 of this episode, but you know when things are about to start to get lighter. And this is a story that is the story. All stories are based on the Bible story that we're telling. And so we have the greatest source material, and we have the greatest rhythmic material the world has ever seen.
So, yeah, for sure. So there's a lot of TV shows and movies that are about the futility of life. They celebrate badness in many ways. That's become pretty popular over the last 20 years. The term anti-hero has become very popular in television and in movies. And it's not always necessarily a bad thing. There's stories in the Bible that are very depressing and very sad, and they are inherently about how the frailty of our human existence and our need for God, our need for a Savior. But the difference between our show and some of these other shows is that we actually have the arrival of that Savior. We have the answer to the question. Yeah. We have the resolve to the problem. And so we can't skip over the darkness, and we don't. In fact, sometimes we stay a long time in it. And that's because we really do want the viewer, all of you, and especially people who haven't necessarily found the answer yet, to truly identify with and relate with the question, the problem, or the doubt, so that when the answer comes, when the solution comes, that then they can identify with that. But if they don't identify first with the pain or the struggle or the question, then they don't believe the answer, or they don't believe they need it. And so, yes, we have a lot of dread in season 4, and there's dread coming in season 5, and of course season 6 is the most dreadful story in the history of humanity. But that's what's going to make some of the stories within these seasons so beautiful and so joyous, and of course season 7 so beautiful and so joyous. And that is, of course, what is always on our mind every time we're going through some of these challenging stories is, oh wait, okay, how can we make it really beautiful when Gaius surrenders and falls on his knees and calls Jesus Lord? And those moments are the moments that, of course, keep you watching, because they're not only beautiful moments from Scripture, but they're moments and reminders of what this story is about, is that Jesus is the one who brings hope here on earth and in heaven. And we keep that as the banner among all the stories we tell the entire show.
I love that. So many of those moments are pretty hard-hitting emotionally, right? Do we have any criers in the room when you're watching The Chosen? I can't make it through an episode without, crying. Are there Easter eggs, little hints that you guys are dropping in previous episodes or previous seasons that you could think of that's kind of setting up these moments of release or dread?
Well, I think that, for instance, the Gaius story that you just mentioned of his servant being healed, we do set up that moment several episodes before we even get there. In fact, it's a season ahead when Simon, named Simon at the time, is having a conversation with Gaius, and he alludes to his family situation. And astute or maybe nerdy, or people who are really looking into the Gospels text might trip something up in their brain of, wait, there's a story about a Roman centurion with a sick kid or servant. And so we do try to plant those things in people who are super familiar with the text, maybe pick up on them, maybe they don't, and then others are surprised. And then when they learn the story of the healed servant, and they go back and read it in their Bible, like, oh my goodness, they were setting this up for seasons on end. So we do some of that.
Yeah, and think about the Gaius story, because we're talking about Gaius right now, all the way back to season 1. He's bowing to Quintus. We set those things up so that when he bows to Jesus, it is a true character arc. It is a journey that we don't often get in a lot of depictions of the Bible, and sometimes we don't even really get it in Scripture, because it'll just say, and Jesus went here and did this, and Jesus went here and did that. The gospel writers weren't writing a TV show. They weren't following necessarily all the time of a beginning, middle, and an end of each of their stories. The story was about Jesus' perspective on this. So we have a different responsibility. But yeah, all the way back in season 1, some of the things that Gaius is saying. I mean, remember back in episode 7, keep moving, street preacher, right? I don't want you here. Well, then, of course, Gaius comes and finds him. I mean, those things were set up a long time ago. The bridal, of course, which isn't a biblical story, but we were setting some of those things up. The reason I pointed at Tyler, though, is I would say that this is his immense gift. All of us bring different things to the table, and sometimes we cross over, and I've had some ideas that, made sense later, and Ryan's had some ideas, but Tyler is a genius when it comes to finding ways to connect symbols, finding ways to connect people, backstories in ways that really do create that aha moment where you go, oh, wow, I've never thought of it that way before. And that's why all the monologues that you hear in all our Christmas specials were written by this guy.
So one of the most beautiful moments is in season 4, episode 4, where Gaius finally comes to Jesus, and he somehow almost ends up comforting him in a way, right? And that was very interesting. Dallas, I've kind of heard you mention it as in the lion and the lamb, right? Can you unpack that a little bit and the heart behind that moment?
Yeah, there's a song about the lion and the lamb. The actual scripture from Isaiah is the wolf will lie down with the lamb in the future kingdom. And I just remember when, in that moment, when Gaius comes to perhaps thank Jesus again, we don't really show why, but we know that he probably wanted to go back and go, okay, you really did it, and I wanted to say thank you. And he sees Jesus, and he just has this little moment of intuition of they just look at each other, and Jesus needs comfort, and Gaius has gotten comfort. And a lot of times, the whole point of the gospel is when you're changed, when you're given something, you want to give back. We worship out of gratitude for what's been given to us. And so I just remember thinking when I saw that image when we were filming it of Jesus and Gaius hugging, I thought, the wolf and the lamb, the lion and the lamb. That's what happens when the kingdom comes to earth. And so that visual was just something that really, I thought, mattered and was a beautiful way to cap off actually the literal midpoint of the show, right?
Yeah.
The middle episode of the middle season.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Dallas, me and you were talking a little bit about Rema's death and how you guys were torn about the way she died and how hard that was. Are there any alternate endings that were considered about how that played out?
Wait, now he's talking about the alternate Rema endings. You guys, the book is finished.
That's fixed.
It has its ending.
Yeah. I was not torn, actually. We came up with the idea back in season 1 as an opportunity to illustrate pain from the perspective of one of the actual followers. We see it often in people that Jesus encounters, but we thought, what about one of our actual followers? And so because Rema was an invented character, it was an opportunity for us to explore some themes. And so we decided that in season 1. As we approached season 4, Ryan and Tyler approached me, and we're like, we're not sure about this, and so we had a lot of conversations about it. We never ultimately make decisions that we're not at least mostly in line with each other on, but we just, we had it planned for so long, and they just said, let's just make sure this is right. So an alternate idea, I don't want to get too much into the weeds of it, but one of the alternate ideas was just, seriously wounded and still sent off to her father. And we thought about what that would mean if her father hears about this serious wounding and takes her away from Jesus. We thought about what that would lead to, and so we explored some of that. But you can share some. You can maybe share. It's okay. We're among friends about what led to your question. What led to maybe this isn't the right way to go. Besides the fact that we love Yaz so much and didn't want to stop.
Yeah, we do, and that was a secondary. As much as we love Yasmin and working with her, it was a secondary concern. I think primarily we never want the devices of our show or the turns that the story takes to distract from our central storyline, which is always and will be Jesus and his ministry. And if if the storyline is gonna spike to such a degree that everybody's attention goes to that, and we start to lose the thread of what's happening for the spectacle, we were afraid we could lose our way. But after some discussion, we did consider that as a practical storyline. We also thought of the people involved, right? And sometimes you think of these things in a vacuum, you get in your own head, and you're like, oh my gosh, it's gonna be a water cooler moment, and everybody's gonna think we jumped a shark, and we got desperate. But the people involved are Dallas, whose direction we trust, whose direction we know is thoughtful, metered, is artistic, is tasteful, demure, some might say.
That's what everyone describes me as. Demure.
Very mindful.
Very
As
classy.
the kids say. There's some kids here. And that helped kind of put that idea in its place. It wasn't ever going to be spectacular for spectacle's sake. And in fact, when we look at our big set pieces, they are always about the intimate moment happening within the set piece, right? So this was going to be no different. That was one of the things that really chilled me out.
The thing that ultimately compelled us to stick with the plan was the future of the story, of Thomas's story. Because we really didn't want to take away from this wrestling that we all have today. But when Lazarus is raised from the dead, and you do have to wonder, why did Jesus raise some people out of a tomb and not others? And so we thought that was an important thing to explore.
Hey, hopefully you're enjoying this conversation from ChosenCon last year. And I wanted to make sure that you guys knew that my guy Dallas Jenkins is actually going to be at the Bless God Summit here in Carlsbad, California, happening March 27th, 28th, 29th at the West End Spa and Resort. So if you want more information on that, please go to blessgodsummit.com. You can get in-person tickets by clicking purchase tickets, or you can get a virtual ticket along with some different and exclusive merch available only at blessgodsummit.com. We also have our Occupy Till I Come 60-day devotional and journal back in stock. You could bundle that with a virtual ticket too. All right? Can't wait to see you at the Bless God Summit. All right, let's jump back into this conversation.
And then also, of course, it's not a spoiler to know that Thomas doesn't believe that Jesus is raised from the dead. And so we were starting to think about that scene when they do reunite. And Jesus does see Thomas, and Thomas does see Jesus, and does realize that death has been conquered. And he sees that in a more dramatic way than any of the other disciples. I mean, all of them are blown away. But for Thomas in the Bible, it's even more of a thing, because he truly didn't believe it until he saw it. And so that for us thought, this is really, really, there's going to be a lot of really great things to say about that, about the conquering of death. And so that's why we ultimately stuck with it.
Apparently only me and the audience were torn about Rema's death. All right, 2 words. Jesus wept. Those 2 words have puzzled theologians for millennial. How did you guys approach that scene in terms of personifying that moment where Jesus completely breaks down and he sobs, and it's very connecting to me as a viewer? How did you guys approach that, considering how much discussion and conversation have been about that, just theologically?
I mean, the theology of it weighed, I think, less heavily on me, even though we're always thinking about theology. I think it was more the emotional authenticity of starting the process of the build-up to that burst of weeping that came from him. That started several episodes before. And he's grappling not only with a personal grief, which is hearing about his friend and knowing what his plan is, which is to wait and not go to Bethany, which is in itself a sort of emotionally torturous thing to go through, to restrain your own divine self from going to rescue your best friend. But it's all for a higher purpose, and one that he's mulling over and thinking about. I think in the previous episode, he even goes to bed early because it's so much to process and to sit on. But it's not just this personal connection. He's also has just come from this situation in Solomon's portico, where his own people and the religious leaders so forthrightly, so outrightly have rejected him. He's facing rejection, death, confusion from his followers. They're not getting it. Judas has just pitched to him a crazy vision of the future that's so out of line with what the actual plan is going to be. I think it's a gasp of loneliness and disappointment, because so few people are tracking with him. And so he's isolated, and then to after all that, when you're going through something crazy, and then you pick up the phone and you hear like your mom's voice. So he is going through all this. He's got all this bad news. Then he sees his own mother, and that's just the last straw. Was there anything theologically for you guys that felt like there was a question about showing Jesus weeping, or?
I mean, it was a character thing for me.
Yeah.
We brought Jesus along to this midpoint where his closest followers asked to sit at his right and left hand. And it is, we imagine, to that point, the saddest moment of his ministry, because he realizes, I cannot teach them. There are no words available in all the languages and all the lands to convey what I must do. And the weight of suffering, even just academically for Jesus, to be fully man and feel it, realize it, know it, of course he would weep. If he was fully man, he wept. And that just made sense character-wise. So I'm glad we wrapped our theological heads around it, which is always a critical part of the discussion, but I think just the humanity in us felt like we wanted to identify with Jesus in that moment.
Yeah, and I mean, I grew up thinking Jesus wept because his friend had died. But that doesn't make any sense, because he's literally within probably 20 minutes about to raise him from the dead. So once, I was probably in my teens when I finally realized that what I'd grown up thinking was probably incorrect, but when you remove that from the equation, he's not weeping just because his friend died, because he knows what's going to happen. It does then open up all the discussions that they just mentioned. Is, all right, what would cause him to weep when he knows what he's about to do? And then you start to realize, oh yeah, this happened. The raising of Lazarus was the purposeful spark that lit the flame of his death. The Bible talks about that because of the raising of Lazarus, the religious leaders were like, uh-oh, now this is real. Everyone, 1 million people plus, are coming to Jerusalem. We're all going to be in the same city at once, and they're all thinking they're about to crown a new king, and that's going to make us really in bad shape with the Romans, and the Romans aren't going to be too happy about this either, and the people are going to fall away from us, who we care about. And so, I mean, this was the trigger. And so when you think about that, it starts to make a whole lot more sense, and you start to realize, okay, it makes sense that Jesus wept. And what we really tried to do, what my job was as the director, was you see who he looks at before he breaks down. He sees his mother, as Tyler said. He sees his good friends. He sees his followers who don't get it. He sees some religious leaders, and it all just crushes him.
In this season, we start really seeing a dark turn for Judas. And it's interesting how you guys have humanized Judas, unlike other shows where he's this like snarky, dark character hiding in the shadows. Can you explain the analogy of the laundry scene, where there seems to be a shift in his character, and how you guys have been setting him up to kind of take this anti-hero villain direction in his character arc?
Tyler?
We've been talking a lot about this today. So actually, one thing Allah mentioned when we were talking with him earlier is that he asked you when they were filming that scene, is there a deeper meaning to all this? And I think you said, you're just doing laundry, which is what the characters would be doing. We often talk about how when we're writing a scene, we can just have two characters sitting and talking to each other. That's a little bit boring. It's okay, we can do it, but it's always more interesting if they have an action, something to do with their hands, something to do with their bodies. But this is even more than that. This is something that they would have been required to do. It's an everyday task that Judas wouldn't be familiar with because he had been having someone else do his laundry for all of his life. So he would need Z to teach him how to do it. But then within the very definition of beating this garment and to knock out all of the stubborn bits that stay lodged between the fibers, and the metaphor of putting away our old tendencies or the things that we used to cling to that identified us and becoming. I think you even mentioned the garment becomes new.
Yeah.
Like it's a renewal process.
Through water, right?
Right. The entire image. So it was important for us to be saying something more than just these two characters are talking about how different they are, but to be sort of telegraphing to the audience a bigger message about how different these two characters' paths are going to be.
Yeah, and my note to Allah was, because specifically it was about, does he know there's a deeper meaning? And I was saying, for you, you're just washing the clothes, and the two, Allah doesn't know, I mean, Z doesn't know, of course, what Judas needs. So he's not, for him, it's not a metaphor, but when he says near the end of that scene, it's still dirty, Judas. That's a key moment. That's a key line. And Z doesn't know that is reflecting something much deeper, but we know that. And so that was one of my favorite lines of the whole season. Is it's still dirty, Judas. Your garment is still dirty. You have not gotten rid of all of the stubborn bits and not gotten rid of all of the thing that is keeping you from purity.
Is it fair to say, as I'm watching it, that Judas is convinced that he's doing the right thing? He's convinced and that he's going to bring in what he believes the kingdom is supposed to be by any means necessary. And yet he could be so convinced in his heart. It reminds me of the proverb, right? A man could be right and have his own plans, but God ultimately knows the motives. That he is thinking he's doing the right thing, yet all along he's actually completely off base, yet a part of God's providential plan of the cross. And how did you guys filter through that process? Because that's a very tricky thing to communicate the way it was communicated, where he's human, but he's going into a dark direction and the garment's not truly clean. How did you guys balance all that?
You said it. It's a tricky thing to explain, but I'm going to try my best. And that is to just kind of back up and say Judas is this wonderful opportunity for us to examine a human condition that we experience every day, which is to believe in something 100% and have the results look different than you thought they would.
Woo.
And can you stay with the process when it looks different?
Wow.
You know, I'm encouraged by the fact that I don't know everything I'm ever going to know.
Yeah.
But I have to keep my cup a little empty so some new tea can go into it, right? Judas, we meet a character whose cup is so full, every new idea pours off the side. And Luke carries that weight like nobody else I could have imagined. The genius of casting him goes to this guy and his partner. And
Amanda, I mean, it was Amanda's idea.
yeah.
Seriously. Oh.
So, I mean, that's my answer with him.
Wow.
He's a tremendous opportunity for us to be human with him, with a character who has traditionally not been. But we were never going to treat him as anything other than three-dimensional. You know, I said this thing in this panel earlier today. Faulkner said, you love your characters as much...
No more nor less.
No more and no less than God. And that means we accept their foibles. We accept them for who they are, and we love them for those things. But we can't stop the ruin that their foibles will bring them. Because to cut it off would diminish their opportunity for redemption. We let Judas play. And we introduce all of his defects of character. And they're going to lead him where they lead him. And we try to do that honestly and with some understanding of our own foibles.
We know that near the end of Judas's arc, the Bible specifically says, and then the devil entered into him. And that comes near the very, very end. So the notion that 3 years ago he was already plotting or devil had already entered into him is nonsense. And it's also nonsense to believe that for 3 years he was doing all of this and planning all of this, and that his brothers that he was traveling with had no idea. Clearly, he got to this point. And oftentimes, I wouldn't say I'm an expert on the devil, but I would say that something typically happens to open the door. And so what would have happened to open the door? And so the thing that we really wanted to explore is what I've seen in so many people, and what I've been at risk of experiencing myself. It's probably happened in my life before. I haven't been demon-possessed, of course, but how decisions lead to the next one that lead to the next one. Someone who becomes a chronic liar. Sometimes it just starts with someone answers the phone and they say, hey, Dallas, it's Rich or whoever, I'm making up a name. And I go, tell him I'm not here. So I do that enough and the callus starts to form. I become more comfortable doing that. And then over time it becomes easier to tell deeper lies. And then you tell a lie that gets you in trouble if the truth is exposed, and you start to go, okay, the consequence of the truth is greater than the consequence of me just holding on to my lie. Because my lie I can actually cover up and I can just live with myself. That's okay. I just don't want others to have to know about it. And so one thing leads to another, and that also happens with money very, very easily. That's why we're so warned about it. It's not that money is inherently evil, but it can easily lead to it. And so Judas does, of course, like every villain, no one actually comes up in the morning, wakes up in the morning and goes, I can't wait to be villainous today. I can't wait to do the wrong thing. They justify their actions. And so we're showing you how our actions can be justified, even actions that end in something so horrifying and evil as betraying the Savior of the universe. We also happen to know that his ultimate ending comes from guilt. He actually tries to return the money. So that reveals that somewhere along the line, there was a time when he didn't need money or didn't care about money either and was truly following, because he so quickly is like, oh my gosh, what have I done? We believe. So those are the things that we play with, combined with the fact that, yes, the devil does enter into him. And so how do we portray that as well? That's why you should watch season 5.
Wow, that was profound. Holy moly. Like a conversation about sanctification and consecration. That makes me want to read my Bible more. Wow. All right. Season 4, episode 7. Jesus says to be frustrated is to be human. How did you guys portray Jesus as frustrated yet sinless? How did you portray him as dealing with these knucklehead disciples that just keep not getting it without crossing that line into sin? And was that difficult?
Well, in the writing, I mean, we're often thinking about Jesus' human emotional journey toward his end, toward the cross. And along the way, yeah, there are some humanly maddening things that are happening. I think one of the things that does happen in episode 7 is the disciples go into complete disintegration and start throwing things and yelling at each other and threatening each other and talking about how one person might not even belong or things like that. And Lazarus is very quick to be like, these guys are really crazy and annoying and frustrating. And Jesus has been sitting with these guys a lot longer than Lazarus and just owns that he also feels frustrated. And I think that that's a space that doesn't get talked about maybe enough. Like, I don't know how much I've heard in the discourse around Jesus over the years, and ever a sermon about Jesus' frustration. I'm sure it's been preached. But it's a topic that when we got to it, we're like, wait a second. This is really annoying the way people are behaving, and it's how we would behave. It's very human and short-sighted, and we all would, if we were in the disciples' shoes, would be just as kind of finicky about all of this stuff, and we know that. But we just didn't want Jesus to be either immune to it or, like distant from it, or to be so overcome with it, as you mentioned, from slipping into sin. To be so overcome that he would maybe lash out or be unkind. He is firm with the disciples, but never unkind. He can be sarcastic and kind of cutting, but it never crosses the line. So that's been like a seasons-long discipline of honing that character.
Well, and the main reason is because even being harsh is not always wrong. I mean, harshness oftentimes produces discipline, and Jesus was clearly harsh in the Gospels multiple times, said some really, really tough things, used names to call, describe vipers and all this stuff. When he turned over the tables in the temple, I mean, that was physical. That was a physical display of extreme anger. Our composers right now are working on the score for the season 5, of course, and it includes, as you've seen on a big mirror, display outside, Jesus with the whip. And they're saying, this is an interesting one to score, because score is usually reflective of emotion. And they're like, is this a cool scene? Jesus doing something cool? Or is this an angry scene? Of course he's angry. Or is it sad? And, you'll see the answer when we get to season 5. But my point is that, if he can be frustrated at the religious leaders for doing something wrong, if he can be frustrated at people who own businesses in the marketplace, it's certainly not wrong to be frustrated. If he can be frustrated at a tree for not producing figs when he's hungry, then certainly he can be frustrated at his own followers and actually express that frustration in real ways. And we oftentimes, because we are so often focused on the divinity of Christ, which is a good thing, because he is God and he is divine, but we sometimes do that at the expense of something that is also important, his humanity, that he could identify with us. And so in the same episode, or maybe I think it's 2 episodes back to back, he says to Mother Mary, also human. And he says to Lazarus, when Lazarus, oh, I'm only human, he goes, so am I. Because they don't want him to be frustrated. They want him to just to just always be kind of above them. And he is when it comes to knowledge, but he is among us, God with us, when it comes to emotion.
Yeah, that's beautiful.
Can I say one more thing about the humanity-divinity thing? When season 7 is over, all 3 of us will miss writing for the character of Jesus. It will leave an enormous gap in our lives. We will be bereft of that. But what I will say is that these announcements last night, as we've been talking through the characters and the storylines of Moses and Joseph, and even some of the Acts of the Apostles, it's a little bit of a relief for there to be no divine characters, and also a bit of a burden that there are so many human characters with a lot of human flaws. But this balancing act that we've been doing for the past 7 years, and that we will, I hope, complete with as much excellence as is required of us. I hope it's a race well run when it's over, and we will very infrequently have to think about how to balance the divine and the human, because that has been probably one of the most
by far
important.
the most challenging thing,
Yeah.
putting words into the mouth of Jesus that balance that divinity and that humanity. If we can get to the end of season 7 and be able to go,
Wow.
is that good? We okay? We good?
We're close.
That will be a big relief.
Okay, as we wind down our time, I have a personal technical question. How much of what we see is 100% what you guys wrote, and how much do you guys sometimes let them improv a bit, or let them, maybe the lines get changed around, or in the dialogue something gets added that wasn't in the script? Does that, I think it happens. I talked to some of the actors, and are you guys usually cool with it, or is there ever a time like, oh, just another line?
They don't actually tend to face that. Occasionally, the actors will reach out to you, possibly because they know what my answer might be, and so they don't go to dad, they go to mom.
Authority shopping. Yeah.
And they'll say, I'm curious about this, or do you mind this, or can I change this? But they don't have to deal on the set, is where that ultimate decision is made. And I am always willing to let the actors try something, unless, of course, it's contradictory, and we usually work that out. Ironically enough, the moment I just mentioned, also human. That was Jonathan. We had written something. It was like, I'm human too, or what about me? He said something different, and Jonathan said, what if I just, also human? And I'm like, please.
Wow.
But we want the best idea to win.
Yeah.
And so it's actually encouraging when an actor who hopefully knows their character really, really well comes up with something brilliant. And we're like, okay, good. We're not the only ones responsible for this. It's really a beautiful moment. And there are some actors who are more comfortable with that than others. Some actors who really prefer to stay on the page. They like to be prepared. They like having the guardrails. But I mean, every single time Elijah Alexander, who plays Atticus, every time he shows up on set, he's got some history lesson that he's been working on, and he's like, I think he could also say this, and I'm like, go ahead, say it, I'll cut it in post-production anyway. No. But no, he's brought, there really have been some lines in the show, plenty of lines that are like, okay, we didn't think of that, and that's really awesome, and we want to use that. So that it happens often, it doesn't bother us at all. What would bother me, and this hasn't happened, is if an actor literally refuses to do something that I ultimately believe is best, that we believe is best. We've heard them out, but we just don't agree, and if someone actually said, well, then I'm not going to cooperate, that would be a problem.
All right.
That hasn't happened yet.
Final question. Without any spoilers, unless you want to give us some.
You gonna be here tonight?
Which
Hang on.
one character, are you guys most excited to see unfold in the upcoming seasons?
Well, there's one that comes to mind, I think, instantly for all three of us. I'm going to go outside the box and say Pilate. Oh. He's got a hard decision coming, and a lot of reasons to do the things he does eventually. A lot of pressures on him, and it's a fun sort of built-in part of our story to walk you through why he said what he said. So,
Anybody else?
Atticus.
One quick thing about the Pilate thing too is that's a great example of when you use the word unfolding, a character that we developed starting in season 3, who you've never seen before he meets Jesus, and wrestling with that because we know that Pilate gets the ultimate decision in history and chooses to punt. He's like, I don't want to make it, and so that ambiguity we want to show from the time you meet him. And so that's been a really interesting character to play. And a lot of people were thrown at first by his age, like, oh, you know, you always picture Pilate as this older guy, but we thought, no, actually, in realistic, he probably was closer to the age that we're portraying him. And we love this notion of Atticus being in a bit of an Obi-Wan Kenobi role with Pilate, that of course will play out in future seasons as well. I am really excited about Thomas because I really am excited when Thomas realizes that death has been conquered. And I know that sounds like a spoiler, but it's in the Bible. But it's really beautiful. And I'm also excited about the soldier at the cross, because I'm excited. Because it's going to be a really cool moment. That's all I'll say.
Well, gentlemen, this has been great. I love the ability for you guys to take the narrative and make it come alive and drive us back into the scriptures and go deeper for ourselves while seeing it hit us in perhaps a different way. So thank you guys so much for peeling the layers behind the secret sauce and the process that you guys have.
We love you. We do it for you.
All right. Thank you, guys. Hey, thank you so much for checking out the video. Please be sure to comment below and subscribe and all that good stuff. And check out this other video that YouTube seems to be recommending just for you. Let me know if they nailed it. All right? I'll see you over there. Peace.